How much are you losing if you do a co-sync? You're getting 28% fewer pregnancies than if you breed at the right time.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Dairy Science Digest. This is a podcast designed to bring the Journal of Dairy Science straight to the ears of dairy producers. My name is Reagan Bluel, and I'm from the University of Missouri Dairy Team. And we have three guests today to discuss a robust paper about reproduction. And this month's article in press for the Journal of Dairy Science is titled "The Effects of Artificial Insemination with Conventional or Sex-Sorted Semen on the Fertility of Lactating Dairy Cows." And we're going to be discussing actually three separate massive projects that involve about 40,000 cows across several states to help us understand really what is that ideal time to inseminate relative to that final GnRH shot that you give, and the ideal time to inseminate if you have electronic estrus detection devices. The icing on top is all of this is relative to the semen type using conventional sexed or beef. So let's sit back and listen because everyone knows how important a pregnant animal is in your herd. We are here today to discuss those nuanced details and optimize the pregnancy per AI metric in your herd. So, welcome to the Dairy Science Digest, guys. Let's take a moment to round robin, please, and introduce yourself to our listeners.
Okay, I can go ahead and start. My name is Paul Fricke. I'm a professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I'm in the Animal and Dairy Sciences Department. I'm a reproductive physiologist. I also have an extension appointment. Paulo and Vanda go next.
So my name is Vanda. I'm a professor at the University of Évora. I belong to the Animal Science Department, and I'm also a veterinarian by education.
Hello, my name is Paulo Carvalho. I'm a former student with Dr. Fricke, did a master and PhD in dairy cattle reproduction. Spent quite some years working with Paul, and right now I have the position of international sales and research specialist at ST Genetics, and we had an opportunity to have fun again, studying reproduction in dairy cows.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, as I was reading through the paper, like I mentioned in the introduction, there's almost three independently strong papers here in one. And all three were well designed and created this massive data set to publish through the Journal of Dairy Science. So, we'll dive right in and peel apart the layers of this onion to best understand reproduction. So, let's just go ahead and zoom right into experiment one. Dr. Fricke, if you would like to talk a little bit about what made you think to test the 0 hour versus 16 hour. What's the science methodology behind that?
Yeah. So I'm going to take a step back and do a little bit of background. I'm going to go, first of all, I'd just like to say, so I have an extension appointment. I think timing of insemination is still one of the big questions that I get with regard to farmers asking about these particular protocols, particularly when things aren't working well as far as conception on farms. It's one of the first things people start to look at. So I'm going to go back to the original OvSync protocol in 1995.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing about the OvSync protocol is cows don't show estrus. And so how do you know, if the cow's not showing estrus, how do you know when to breed the cow? And the original OvSync protocol had a 16-hour time interval from the last GnRH to time to AI. The very first study that was published back in 1995
Mm-hmm.
on OvSync, they used a 16-hour time period. That was kind of based on their best guess at the time, but I want to go back and ask the question, where did this recommendation for breeding at 16 hours after the second GnRH treatment, where did that come from? And that came from one of the early studies with OvSync, where they set up cows, they gave GnRH, 7 days later prostaglandin, 2 days later GnRH, and then they had different groups of cows, about 150 cows per treatment. They either inseminated at the same time as GnRH, at 8 hours, at 16 hours, at 24 hours, or at 32 hours. And we know that cows are going to ovulate between 24 and 32 hours after that GnRH treatment. And we want to put semen in the cows before they ovulate, because that gives time for sperm transport and capacitation. Okay.
So while you're talking, your discussion here in the backside of the paper is really robust. And I love that you're taking the time to summarize some of this background information that we just don't think about as much as we could or
Right.
should. But I want to draw everybody's attention to there's a clickable link in the bottom of the show notes so that you can pull up this paper, not only to follow along on the discussion, but later in our conversation, we're going to be referring a lot to these figures. You guys have some awesome figures in the paper. And so if you're not driving down the road, guys, go ahead and pull up the paper so you can follow along with us.
That's great, Reagan. So the results of that trial, I'm just going to read off the conception rates at those different times. The co-sync, essentially, if you bred at the same time as generates 37% conception rate, 41% at 8 hours, 45% at 16 hours, back down to 41% at 24, and all the way down to 32% at 32 hours. And so in this paper, because there were fairly low numbers of animals, cows, in each of these treatments, there was no statistical difference between conception rates from 0 to 24 hours. Breeding at 32 hours, however, was worse. Okay. But as I read off those numbers, what you'll notice is that 16-hour time period had the numerically highest conception rate. So I really think that's primarily where we got this idea that we got to breed at 16 hours. And again, the question is, how close to that 16 hours? I get that question all the time. Do we have to be exactly at 16 hours? How much leeway do you have? So that's just a background, kind of where that 16-hour time period came from.
It's just kind of a fun thing to feature there. You're talking about how much we have advanced in the dairy industry because of projects like these. And so I applaud all of you guys for all the hard work, because if you think about synchronizing 40,000 cows and collecting data on 40,000 cows, this is not an insignificant feat. So sorry to interrupt, but let's zoom right into figure 2 and talk about some of these results.
All right, so let's go into that study 1 that you described. And the way this study was set up is cows were submitted to a double OvSync protocol. I think people are familiar with that. It's 2 OvSyncs back to back. And then what we were testing was if you breed at the same time as the last GnRH, or you delay that breeding 16 hours after that GnRH. So 16 hours is the recommended. 0 hours, however, is what we call a co-sync. Now, co-sync protocols, the reason people do these is because it's easy. It's one less cow handling time. And Reagan, this is probably the biggest question. I was just out in Idaho, and these big dairies, it's a real pain to catch a cow, to get that last GnRH, let them go and catch them at that 16-hour time period.
There's a true cost to that. Yeah.
Oh, there's a cost to that. And people, the question I get from breeders and farms is, how much of a decrease do I have if I do the co-sync? All right, so we ended up with 2,225 cows from 6 different herds in Wisconsin that did this. Cows, this is a randomized controlled study. So cows are randomized to be bred at 0 hours or 16 hours. We had 898 cows bred at 0 hours. Their conception rate was 36%. For the 1,026 cows bred at 16 hours, the conception rate was 46%.
10% difference, guys.
Well, and let me explain that. That's a 10 percentage point difference. But if you do the calculation, it's a 28% increase in pregnancies.
Right. Yeah.
That's so huge. We're talking the difference between percentage point difference and the percent increase. Those are 2 very different things. But how much are you losing if you do a co-sync? You're getting 28% fewer pregnancies than if you breed at the right time. And so if there's one take-home message that I have for the entire dairy industry out there, stop doing co-sync.
Yes. Right. It's worth the extra handling to get that sizable
very much
increase.
So.
Okay, just to reiterate, co-sync means breeding at the same time as that last GnRH shot. Don't do that.
And the thing I tell farmers about this is, I say, when they ask me about this, I say, okay, you mean to tell me that you're going to work on compliance, you're going to find the right cows and the right days to give them all these treatment. I mean, it takes 7 treatments to do a double OvSync program, and then you're going to choose the wrong time to put the semen into the cows. So that doesn't make any sense, right?
Not much. No.
We would do a lot for a 10 percentage point increase in conception rate. So getting the semen in at the right time is a big deal.
Just work them one more time. Awesome. And so the double OvSync program is visible there on figure 1 if you want to take a time to review what that looks like. But it's very familiar. 7 shots. We've been accustomed to this. Nearly 26 days later, you put some semen in the cow.
There is an important one. We only use multiparous cows, right? Cows
Yeah.
that really have high production that people complain they have a hard time getting pregnant, right? Those are the high producing cows. We want to keep them in the herd and
Hmm.
look at how much more pregnancies we have on those cows just by putting semen in the cows at the right time.
Hugely
Yeah.
different. And you can maintain those mature animals that are just cranking milk.
Yep. That's a great point, Paulo. That first study was only done in the older cows.
Beautiful. Very good. All right. Well, let's segue over to experiment 2 here. And how about you set the stage for me and tell me a little bit about how that experiment was designed there on the 2 dairies in Texas?
Okay, I can. So the experiment two came from trying to answer multiple questions from producers. When sex semen first came along, there were some experiments done that indicated that the optimal timing of insemination was between 18 and 20 hours, right? A little bit later than conventional. And because of farm routines and so on, people were always asking, can I just breed at the same time as the conventional, or do I need to go
Yeah,
to the pens at the different times because that extra
it's a hassle.
work on.
Hmm.
Another thing that happened a lot in the last, say, 10, 15 years is that sorting semen changed completely from the original technology, right? Initially, the concentration was 2 million sperm cells per straw. Right now, most of the straws are at 4 million. So that changed a little bit. And the machines also evolved and the media. So there's a big advancement on semen and semen processing there. And we wanted to answer, hey, does the 18 to 20 hours still apply? Or because of all these improvements, we made sex semen more like conventional semen. And can
Hmm.
we just go to the pens at one time and breed the cows at the same time?
Now, when looking at figure 4 and comparing between C and D, it almost looks like sex semen actually outperforms beef semen. Can you talk a little bit about that or tell me about why that's not right?
Okay, this is a really important point. Okay, so this study, a lot of people want to say that fertility with sex semen. I agree with Paulo. The technology with sex semen has come a long way. Okay, we've gotten better at it.
Hmm.
But there is still a conception drag with sex semen. Okay, that
Okay.
gap may have closed a little bit. And the only way you can assess that is in a study where you randomize cows to semen type.
Yes.
This was not one of those studies. Okay. In any of the studies you go to the literature where they randomize cows or heifers to get sex versus conventional semen, there's always a reduction in fertility. So in this particular study, actually, if you look at those graphs, it looks like sex semen is a little more fertile than the beef semen, but that is solely due to the type of animal that you breed with
Receiving
sex
the
semen
semen.
or with beef semen. They're very different animals. You're going to be breeding younger animals with better fertility and better genetics with sex
Rock
semen.
stars.
Yeah, yep.
Yes.
You're going to be breeding older cows, poorer fertility, lower genomics and genetics
To
with beef
beef.
semen. And so that lack of a difference there is due to the type of cow, not the semen type.
Great point. I'm really glad that you brought that up. Good. Very good. So let's just dive right into some of the results that you saw. What sort of pregnancy per AI were you documenting in this protocol?
For cows inseminated with sex semen, right, we had a 49%, and it was a really good fertility considering the location. We did this study over a 3-year period and right through the summers in Texas, right? We did not
Mm.
skip any insemination all the time.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought that up because as I go from farm to farm, periodically I'll encounter producers that quote unquote close the tank and they decide that they're just not going to breed any animals during this particular window, be it because of heat stress or calving in the heat or whatever. They make these decisions, but that definitely impacts your cash flow and your ability to generate milk year round. And so having the average 49% pregnancies per AI throughout the the year. That's tremendous. That's incredible. And graphically, as you look at it, it's neat to see how robust this data set is there on figure 3.
Right.
And then, so you did a pregnancy diagnosis at 32 days, but just prior to that, would give the GnRH shot in preparation for preg check. Can you talk a little bit about that ReSync protocol that you were defining as GGPPG?
Yes. So that was the GGPPG protocol, was the protocol we did with Dr. Fricke during my PhD. And one of the farms was probably one of the first adopters of the program. And one of the challenges they had at the farm was estrus detection. So they decided that in order to maximize the insemination rate, they had to start the protocol as soon as possible. So they gave a GnRH on day 18. They gave a second GnRH on day 25. So that completed the GG portion. On day 32, if the cows were open, then they received prostaglandin and they were inseminated within 3 days, completing the protocol and being inseminated. The second farm, the only difference was that they started the program instead of the 18, they started the program on day 25. So they gave GnRH on day 25. On day 32, if the cow was open, she received the second GnRH and then prostaglandin 7 days later.
Very good. And all of this is mapped out on figure 1 so that you can kind of track along and potentially implement this program on your farm. And I thought one thing noteworthy in the experimental design, there was no cherry picking.
Right. So they rely 100% on timed AI to inseminate their cows. All cows receive timed AI, right?
Now let's move into experiment 3 a little bit more. And this took place in Texas and Arizona on some dry lot dairies. And they have both Holstein, Jersey, and crossbred cows. And they were milked 3 times a day on a TMR dry lot. In this situation, we have both primiparous and multiparous cows and was looking at breeding both sex semen or beef first service or second service, that deviating a little bit more towards the beef side of things. So let's talk a little bit about how those herds were equipped with electronic identifications and how you use those to optimize your pregnancies per AI.
In these herds, all cows had an estrus detection system that was read every time the cows came to the milking parlor.
So the cool thing about these farms, these were crossbred farms, really trying to maximize the potential of the crossbreeding. And these 2 farms, the opposite of experiment 2 is that these 2 farms were really trying to maximize estrus detection.
Mm-hmm.
They went months without doing synchronization. They were trying to rely on 100% estrus detection system.
Mm-hmm.
Not so worried about the timing when the days in milk, when the cows were inseminated. But one thing to notice is the level of milk production that we were getting out of these cows, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Experiment 2, we were getting about 90 pounds of milk per cow. Experiment 3, we were on the 66 pounds of milk, so a little
Yes.
bit lower
Mm-hmm.
milk, right? And if we all remember the impact of high milk production on the physiology of these cows. So because they were producing a little bit less milk, that gave them better opportunities for being inseminated with estrus detection.
Something that I really wanted to draw attention to the listeners here in figure 4, experiment 3 is highlighted in C and D. And if you look at from 0 to 40 hours after this device indicated that cow's in heat. So she was put on a list saying, I'm in heat, please pay attention to me. This graph, you can see conception fall off. You can see that pregnancy per AI just start to plummet, slide off the side. There's an early insemination deduction. So if you get there a little bit too early and if you get there a little too late, both of those scenarios, you're going to compromise pregnancies per AI. Let's talk a little bit about the too early versus the too late and what your observations were in that data set.
So you lose a lot of fertility if you go too early relative to the onset of the estrus.
Great point.
And then if you go too late, which we consider after 24 hours, you also lose fertility. And as you mentioned, you can see the conception rate plummet after 24 hours.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go to experiment 3 then. Experiment 3 answers the question. It's an observational study. So cows, you've got an estrus alert by an activity system. And inseminations occurred at 0 to 40 hours relative to that estrus alert. And what you can see in the data in the bottom two figures of figure 3, which is the raw data, or the middle two figures in figure 4, you can see that there is an effect of timing of insemination. It's lower if you're too early, and then it drops off starting at about 20 to 25 hours. You can see those drop offs with both conventional and beef. And so what the bottom two lines are, and this is a nice analysis that Vanda and Paulo did, they said, well, let's chop out, let's just look at those breedings, just like relative to that last generation. Let's only look at the breedings between 13 and 23 hours that occurred with estrus. And you can see, again, it's just flat across those time periods.
So an entire work day, 10 hours worth of a day, you can choose to breed.
Yes. Yeah, but here's the important point, Reagan. In order to target 13 to 23 hours, you have to generate lists of cows twice a day.
Ah, good point. Right? Very
you
good
have to
point.
go out, you have to generate a list of cows in
Push
the morning and breed those cows that are going to be 13 to 23 hours. Yeah. And then in the afternoon, you're going to have to go out and generate a list of cows 13 to 23 hours. So that's the main take home. Would you guys agree with that, Paulo?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. So that's the key. I mean, those are the key take homes.
Those electronic identification tools are so awesome in their ability to tell us when they're in estrus, but we still have to generate the report, right? Yeah, good.
The automation that's going on right now in the dairy industry is phenomenal, right? And every time we see, so many farms milk these cows 2 to 3 times a day, right? And they have always people on the farm. And all of these farms have electronic IDs. They have sorting gates, right? It's not that we have to go to these pens of 300 cows and chase one cow, right? Cows come to the parlor. There's always people on the farms milking the cows, moving the cows, and a lot of people on these large dairies know how to do insemination. And with the sorting gates that the cows come to the parlor, they go in at the exit and then get separated, and someone can inseminate them there. It just makes that work so easy, right? It's so really nice. And I'd like to say that, the amount of technology that we see nowadays on dairy farms makes actually fun to go work. Hey, I want to go play with technology.
Right.
Let's go to a dairy farm.
Yes, absolutely. And you can just walk in and get the task done and know that you can move on to the next task. It's beautiful. But I am quite curious. How did you get the individual raw data points per
this is a good
hour
point.
on
I
experiment
wanted Paulo
2?
and Vanda to explain this, exactly how it was done on these big farms.
Okay, so in experiment 2, right? So again, we've just talked about the technology, right? That's going on. And these were large dairies. They used EID readers and the mobile devices that have the software. And what we asked to the farms is, you scan the cows every time you give a treatment, either GnRH or prostaglandin, and the device that we were using, they recorded that timing.
So you get a timestamp in the computer.
So you get a timestamp of day, hour, minute, and second. And we also said, okay, if you're going to do the insemination, we also want you to scan that electronic ID. For the cows to be included, they had to be scanned at the time of the GnRH. And they also had to be scanned at the time of the insemination.
Yeah, and then when you have those two timestamps, it's just a matter of doing the math.
Yes, and so you can make that assessment.
Yeah, so it's pretty cool. It's really nice. It's a really good illustration of how technology is used on these farms, kind of allowed us to do the study the way that was done.
I was just going to add that for estrus detection, you also have a timestamp associated with the beginning of activity.
Yes.
And even if the cow only comes twice or 3 times to the parlor, the time that the estrus started, it will be recorded on the logs of the device.
Awesome. And I do think I wanted to clarify, if we could rewind a little bit there on figure 2, when we're comparing panel B and C, that's going to be the early, which is 0 to 2 hours worth after estrus. And then the ideal time is going to be within that 15 to 16 hours after the estrus notification. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's kind of looking at that co-sync question again. And another important thing that we haven't brought up, the onset of activity to ovulation is about the same timing as when you give a GnRH treatment to ovulation.
Yeah.
Those two things are biologically very similar. And so these graphs here, with the beef conventional and sex sorted dairy, the 0 to 2 and 15 to 16 hours, it's just showing again that you can breed too early, even with a heat detection system if you go out and breed those cows.
Okay, so all this noise about once a day breeding, what's your guys' thoughts on that?
Well, that's a good question. So recommendations have changed, and I think that's another important part of this paper, Reagan.
Uh-huh.
In the old days, the old AM/PM rule,
Uh-huh.
I'm trying to kill that off, okay, because it's a very sloppy rule. And it
Yes.
was based on very old data that wasn't very good, but they had to have some kind of
Something.
some kind of a recommendation. What the data and Rainable did some of this data a long time ago, back in the 80s. Once daily breeding programs where a breeder just shows up once a day, breeds the cows that were previously in heat based on tail chalk for the previous 24 hours. There is no difference in fertility between doing that and the AM/PM rule. But
Okay.
what I would say is those are both equally as sloppy. Okay.
Right.
Now that we
Right.
have this technology,
Let's be
now that
better.
we have, now that we have this technology and we kind of know what I used
Right.
to say before we had this technology, if you knew when a cow was coming into heat, you
Do
could
it
probably do a
right.
pretty good job of
Yeah.
breeding the cow, right? We never could do that with visual estrus detection. But now that we've got these heat detection systems,
Isn't it
we
cool?
know. And I
Yeah.
think this data that you're looking at there, the 0 to 2 versus 15 to 16, is just a nice way to pull that data and say, look, we can breed too early or we can breed at the right time.
Yeah, it's just really cool. In two of the data sets, there was discussion about pregnancy loss. And one data set, one experiment was 2%, and the other one was closer to 5%. Do you want to talk a
Yep.
little bit about estrus synchronization and what a good benchmark might be for pregnancy loss and what caused the difference that you saw between these two experiments?
Okay, I'll try to tackle this one first, and then you guys can follow. So
Okay.
this study really wasn't designed to look at pregnancy loss. There's a really nice review paper that my colleague Milo Wiltbank put together and kind of looked at. It's called Pivotal Periods of Pregnancy Loss. And what I would say, when timed inseminations programs, when they came out, what that allowed us to do as scientists is to breed large numbers of cows at exactly the same time on exactly the same day, and then follow them weekly. And so we could actually measure pregnancy loss very well. If you've got cows, small numbers of cows every day of the week getting inseminated, it's very difficult to assess
Capture.
pregnancy loss. Okay, so when the first studies came out looking at pregnancy loss, everybody said, wow, those rates of pregnancy loss, with timed AI is more than with estrus. And that is not the case. Okay. There's no difference in pregnancy loss when you breed a cow to an estrus versus breeding them to a timed insemination. And I'll do a little bit of benchmarking here. We've done a tremendous number of studies. I think both Paulo and Vanda were involved with studies like this, where the first preg check we will do is around 32 days. And we'll do that with ultrasound, and you can see the embryo with the heartbeat. So you know that they're pregnant. And then the first recheck is going to be at about 61 or 62 days. So you've got about a 28-day block of time there. Normal pregnancy losses, or I hate to call pregnancy losses normal, but what we see is somewhere in the 7% range, I would say.
Okay.
They can be as high, and these are just kind of ballpark numbers. It can be as high as 10 or as low as 4 or 5. And so that's just kind of what we see. In this particular study, Paulo, was a little bit lower.
Experiment 3 was a little bit lower, but again, I'd like to point out that the milk production on these cows was also a little bit lower than, right?
Yeah.
Good
So
point.
experiment 2, we had cows at about 90 some pounds of milk. But experiment 3, the cows were on the 66 pounds of milk, right? They were crossbreds. And so that stress of production, right? Experiment 2, the cows were really having that. Experiment 3 cows, not pushing too much of the milk. But they still did a good job, I think.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point, Paulo. And I did a sabbatical in Ireland back in 2014, and those Irish Friesian cattle give a lot less milk than our U.S. Holsteins, and pregnancy losses are a little bit lower.
Well, my favorite question to ask every author every month is, what would you like boots on the ground dairymen to know from this massive data set that you guys have compiled here? Or as you were looking through the data, what did you find most impactful?
Yep. And so let's go through. I think one thing we can do right now, Reagan, is we can kind of go through each study and kind of draw a major conclusion. So if you go
Awesome.
back to study 1, that's the randomized controlled trial, either breeding at 0 hours or 16 hours relative to the last GnRH injection of a double OvSync program. The bottom line is co-sync protocols reduce fertility by about 28%, 10 percentage points difference. Stop doing co-sync. Okay, so that's the main take-home point of experiment 1. Experiment 2, and I'm not sure if this came across in our discussion, really what that was is on these very large farms, what the farms will say is, okay, I'm doing a double OvSync program, but I can't breed them all right at 16 hours.
There's just too many.
There's too many cows, there's too many pens. So how much variability is
Tolerable.
right, is tolerated? And so this 16-hour time period that we had recommended for a long time, those top 2 panels in figure 3 basically show that conception rates are fairly flat from 13 to 23 hours.
It doesn't change.
Whether you're dealing with sex semen or conventional semen, it doesn't change much. If you look at the statistical models on that figure 4, which is the top 2, they're just flat from 13 to 23 hours. So I think the take-home message here is people that sit there with their stopwatch and says, Fricke says to breed at 16 hours and go, right? That kind of thing. That's not necessary.
Thank goodness.
The window is much wider than we originally thought.
Because how much stress has that generated? I just
well,
want
it does.
to...
I mean, it's a common, it's just a question that I get over and over again from these farms. How much variability is allowable? And it's more than we originally thought, Reagan. That's the point.
Well, and I think that just speaks to all the dairymen that you're working with caring, right? I mean, they want to do it right. And if that number is exactly that number, they're gonna do it. But guys, you unchain yourself from that 16-hour mark because there is some flex. Thank goodness.
So that's great. That's great. The window of time in which we have to breed cows relative to that last GnRH is longer than we thought. It's really 13 to 23 hours, not just 16 hours.
Regardless of semen type, right?
Regardless of semen type, there doesn't seem to be. That was the other interesting thing about this study. There didn't seem to be an effective semen type. And then the third take home is really about if you're breeding cows to a heat detection system, 13 to 23 hours after that estrus alert is when you want to breed them, which requires generating lists of cows twice a day. So I think those are the 3. Would you guys have anything to add to that, Paulo and Vanda?
I think those are really 3, good points, for the study and for dairymen out there.
Yeah, that's the big thing. And I think that a lot of people have been talking about timing insemination. I think Paulo mentioned this with sex semen. It just appears on all the data sets. There's no indication that I can see that we want to change the timing of insemination to estrus or a timed insemination protocol when we're using sex semen compared to conventional. That's my interpretation.
Keep it the same. Awesome.
Yeah. What would you say?
I would say keep it the same, keep it simple, but breed those cows.
Get semen in there.
Get semen in the cows.
Yes.
We need that for pregnancies.
All right. Very good. Well, guys, this has been a great discussion. And this ruminant nutritionist doesn't really always get this excited about reproduction. But thank you so much for your time and your willingness and information that we can provide to the audience. And listeners, I applaud you for taking time out of your day today to learn about all these intricate details about the timing of insemination and the best way to get those cows settled. I've learned so much from our conversation, and this has been the June edition of the Dairy Science Digest, which is a monthly podcast project designed to bring the Journal of Dairy Science straight to your ears. We highlight peer-reviewed research articles that are actively in press because it's sound science that you can base your management decisions around and provided to you by your University of Missouri Dairy team. So please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to get future editions straight to your cell phone. This is Reagan Bluel with the Dairy Science Digest, and I hope you have a great day.